Jasmine Harper stands frozen, the elegant restaurant silent as she stares at the eviction notice trembling in her hand. 20 minutes ago, she was just a waitress. Now everyone watches her sign a contract worth millions beside New York's most ruthless real estate mogul. All because she knew how to say hello with her hands. Before we dive into this incredible story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. And if you believe in the power of unexpected connections, hit that like button right now and subscribe to see more stories about ordinary people doing extraordinary things. Now let's go back to where it all began, when Jasmine was still trying her best to be invisible. Jasmine Harper, a 23-year-old black waitress at Lumière, an ultra-exclusive Manhattan restaurant, had perfected the art of invisibility over the past 2 years. She moved silently between tables, serving New York's elite, while enduring subtle racism and condescension from both customers and management alike. The white managers, particularly the head manager, Charles Whitmore, constantly criticized her appearance, especially her natural hair, which they insisted looked unprofessional compared to the straight styles worn by her white coworkers. Despite her flawless service record and exceptional memory for customer preferences, she had been passed over for promotions 3 times, always in favor of less experienced white servers, who Charles claimed had a better look for our clientele. Jasmine had learned to swallow her frustration, knowing that arguing would only cost her the job she desperately needed. Her background was a tapestry of struggles that had shaped her resilience. After losing both parents in a car accident when she was 12, her grandmother Eliza had raised her in a small apartment in Harlem. It was Eliza who taught her sign language as a child, a skill she learned because a neighborhood friend was deaf and Eliza believed everyone deserved to be communicated with directly. Now, Jasmine balanced 3 jobs while trying to complete her business degree at City College. She was just 1 class away from graduating, but recent tuition increases had made it impossible to register for her final semester. The timing couldn't have been worse, as their tiny apartment in a rapidly gentrifying Harlem neighborhood was under threat. That morning, Jasmine and her grandmother had received a 30-day eviction notice, the paper stamped with the logo of Bryant Enterprises, a ruthless development company buying up buildings throughout the neighborhood and converting affordable housing into luxury condominiums. The company was owned by the notoriously private Victor Bryant, a man never seen in public but whose business decisions displaced hundreds of families annually without remorse. Victor had passed away 6 months ago, but his son Alexander seemed determined to continue his father's legacy of destruction. That evening at Lumière, Jasmine arrived early for her shift, hoping the familiar routine would distract her from the eviction notice burning a hole in her pocket. She had just finished arranging silverware when Charles Whitmore pulled her aside, his expression more serious than usual. "We have important guests coming tonight," he said, straightening his already perfect tie. "The kind of people who could determine whether we keep our 3rd Michelin star or not. I'm assigning you to Table 8. Jasmine nodded, hiding her surprise. Table 8 was usually reserved for special guests and almost always assigned to servers with more seniority or, more accurately, less melanin. Do not make any mistakes. Charles continued, his gaze cold. No small talk, no recommendations, unless specifically asked, and absolutely no drawing attention to yourself. These people expect perfection and invisibility. As he walked away to brief the other servers, Jasmine noticed how he assigned the other VIP tables to white servers, leaving her with Table 8, only because it was in the restaurant's quietest corner. She squared her shoulders and prepared herself for another evening of forced smiles and casual discrimination, unaware that the guests arriving in 20 minutes would shatter her carefully constructed invisibility forever. A commotion near the entrance caught everyone's attention as the heavy oak doors swung open. Camera flashes illuminated the restaurant's darkened entryway, momentarily blinding the nearest diners. Alexander Bryant, the 35-year-old heir to Bryant Enterprises and one of New York's most eligible bachelors, according to Forbes, stepped through the doors with confident strides. His tailored Armani suit emphasized his athletic build, and his signature steel-gray tie matched his calculating eyes. Jasmine recognized him instantly from business magazines and real estate blogs. His father's company owned her building, making him indirectly responsible for the eviction notice currently weighing down her pocket. Behind him walked an elegant older woman with perfect posture and silver-streaked dark hair, styled in a sophisticated updo. She wore a deep blue dress that complemented her warm brown skin, accented with a single strand of pearls. This had to be Elizabeth Bryant Alexander's mother, who had rarely been seen in public since her husband's death 6 months ago. Charles practically sprinted across the restaurant to greet them, bowing slightly as he welcomed them to Lumière. "Mr. Bryant, Mrs. Bryant, what an honor to have you with us tonight," he gushed, personally escorting them through the restaurant. Jasmine's heart sank as he led them directly to table 8, her table. She took a deep breath, reminding herself that they were just customers, wealthy or not. She approached the table with practiced grace, consciously adopting the invisible persona expected of servers in establishments like Lumière. "Good evening," she said softly. "Welcome to Lumière. My name is Jasmine, and I'll be taking care of you tonight." Alexander barely glanced up from his phone, grunting something that might have been acknowledgement. Elizabeth, however, looked directly at Jasmine with warm, intelligent eyes that crinkled slightly at the corners. When Jasmine introduced herself again and asked if they would like to hear about the evening specials, Elizabeth didn't respond verbally. Alexander, still looking at his phone, began ordering for both of them without consulting his mother. "We'll have the Kobe beef tartare to start, then the Dover sole for her, and the dry-aged ribeye for me. Medium rare." He didn't bother looking up as he rattled off his preferences. Jasmine noticed Elizabeth's expression shift to one of frustrated resignation, her hands making subtle movements in her lap. In a split-second decision that would change everything, Jasmine interrupted Alexander mid-sentence. "Excuse me," she said before turning to Elizabeth and signing fluently. "Would you prefer something else?" The transformation on Elizabeth's face was immediate and dramatic. Her eyes widened in surprise, then lit up with unmistakable delight as her hands rose to sign back enthusiastically. "Yes, I hate tartare. I would prefer the truffle risotto starter and the halibut main course instead of sole." The entire restaurant fell silent as Jasmine and Elizabeth communicated fluently in sign language. Other diners paused mid-bite to stare at the unexpected exchange. Alexander's phone clattered onto his plate as his jaw literally dropped in shock. Charles nearly dropped a bottle of Chateau Lafite at a nearby table. For the first time since starting at Lumière, Jasmine felt truly visible. The genuine smile on Elizabeth's face made her momentarily forget about the eviction notice in her pocket and the 3 jobs barely keeping her afloat. She signed back, "Excellent choices. The risotto is my personal favorite," before turning to Alexander, whose expression had transformed from shock to intense curiosity. "Sir, would you like to change your order as well?" Throughout dinner, Elizabeth insisted that Jasmine serve them directly, signing animated conversations about food preferences, wine pairings, and eventually how refreshing it was to communicate without an interpreter. "Most people speak to Alexander instead of directly to me," Elizabeth signed during dessert. "They act as if deafness is contagious or means I can't think for myself." Jasmine nodded, signing back. "I understand feeling invisible. People make assumptions based on what they see, not who you are." Their connection transcended the typical server-guest dynamic, creating a bubble of authentic communication amid the pretentious atmosphere of Lumière. When they finished their meal, Elizabeth signed something to Alexander that made him frown thoughtfully. As they prepared to leave, Elizabeth clasped Jasmine's hand warmly between both of hers, a gesture so genuine it brought unexpected tears to Jasmine's eyes. Alexander left a $1,000 tip with a business card tucked underneath bearing a handwritten note. "My mother would like to speak with you. Call this number tomorrow." As soon as the Bryants departed, Charles cornered Jasmine near the service station. His earlier politeness evaporated. "How did you learn to do that?" he demanded, gesturing vaguely with his hands in a poor imitation of signing. When Jasmine explained that her grandmother had taught her as a child, he scoffed. "Well, you were just lucky tonight. Don't let it go to your head. You're still on bathroom cleaning duty for the rest of your shift." As she scrubbed toilets, used by Manhattan's wealthiest residents, Jasmine wondered what Elizabeth Bryant could possibly want to discuss with a waitress living paycheck to paycheck, and whether the business card in her pocket might somehow lead to a solution for the eviction notice alongside it. The next morning, Jasmine sat at her small kitchen table staring at Alexander Bryant's business card while her grandmother prepared tea. "Are you going to call?" Eliza asked, setting a steaming mug in front of her granddaughter. Jasmine traced the embossed logo of Bryant Enterprises with her finger. "I don't know, Grandma. These people are evicting us from our home. Why would I want to talk to them?" Eliza sat down across from her wrinkled hands, cupping her own tea. "Sometimes, child, the universe creates unexpected bridges. That woman really saw you when no one else in that fancy restaurant did. That counts for something." After another hour of deliberation, Jasmine finally dialed the number, expecting to reach a secretary or assistant. Instead, Alexander Bryant himself answered on the second ring. Bryant speaking. His voice sounded different outside the restaurant's hushed atmosphere, younger, less certain. "This is Jasmine Harper. From Lumière last night," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I received your card." There was a pause before Alexander replied. "Miss Harper, thank you for calling. My mother hasn't stopped talking about you, signing about you. She'd like you to join her for tea this afternoon, 3 o'clock at our penthouse. I'll text you the address and alert security to expect you." Before she could form a response, he added, "A car will pick you up at 2:30, and ended the call. At precisely 2:30, a sleek black Lincoln Navigator pulled up outside her building. The driver, a middle-aged man named Terrence, greeted her respectfully, but asked no questions during the 20-minute drive to Manhattan's Upper East Side. The Bryant building dominated the skyline, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that seemed to pierce the clouds. In the lobby, security guards in tailored suits eyed Jasmine suspiciously, questioning her presence, until Alexander's assistant, a razor-thin woman named Vanessa, rescued her. "They always do that with visitors who don't fit their profile of Bryant Associates," she whispered, as they entered a private elevator requiring a fingerprint scan. "Don't take it personally." The penthouse occupied the top 3 floors of the building with ceilings so high they created the illusion of infinite space. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered panoramic views of Central Park and the city beyond. Jasmine tried not to gawk at artwork she recognized from museum textbooks now hanging casually on the walls of a private residence. Elizabeth Bryant emerged from a side room, her face lighting up when she spotted Jasmine. She signed enthusiastically, moving with the grace of a former dancer. Alexander stepped forward to interpret, explaining that his mother rarely met new people who could sign fluently. "Before you arrived," he translated as, Elizabeth's hands moved rapidly. "I was telling Alexander how refreshing it was to have someone address me directly without being prompted. Most people in our social circle never bothered to learn sign language even after 12 years. Elizabeth continued signing, explaining that she had lost her hearing in her 30s from an autoimmune condition. Alexander admitted he only learned to sign because his mother had refused to communicate with him otherwise. 3 months of silence taught me to take it seriously," he said with a hint of a smile that briefly softened his features. The conversation shifted when Elizabeth asked about Jasmine's life. Reluctantly, Jasmine shared her struggles with completing her business degree and supporting her grandmother. When asked where she lived, she hesitated before naming her neighborhood. Alexander stiffened visibly, his jaw tightening, as he recognized it as one of his company's development projects. Elizabeth noticed the tension immediately and signed something private to Alexander that made him look distinctly uncomfortable. He excused himself for an urgent business call, leaving the women alone in the vast living room. As soon as he departed, Elizabeth's signing became more direct. "Are you having housing issues?" she asked, her movements sharp with concern. "Tell me the truth. I know my son's company is developing in that area." When Jasmine admitted they'd received an eviction notice from Bryant Enterprises, Elizabeth's expression darkened with anger. She signed rapidly, "I suspected as much," before asking more questions about their situation. Alexander returned to find his mother signing with such intensity that her movements cut through the air like blades. Jasmine, embarrassed at having revealed their circumstances, prepared to leave, but Elizabeth firmly signaled for her to stay. Alexander, visibly uncomfortable, cleared his throat before offering Jasmine a job as his mother's social companion. "My mother needs someone who signs fluently to accompany her to events," he explained smoothly. "The salary would be $80,000 annually plus benefits." The figure, more than triple what Jasmine currently earned across all three jobs, seemed designed to solve her financial problems overnight, though she suspected it was more charity than genuine employment. Before she could respond, Elizabeth began signing forcefully. Alexander's translation came reluctantly. Mother thinks you would be better suited working directly with her on the Bryant Foundation, which focuses on urban development issues. He appeared startled by this suggestion, as if it disrupted some carefully laid plan. The meeting ended with Jasmine agreeing to consider their offers, though she felt caught between worlds that had never been meant to intersect. As Alexander's driver took her home, they passed through neighborhoods where Bryant developments had displaced predominantly black and brown communities, replacing affordable housing with luxury high-rises that original residents could never hope to afford. "You must be special," Terence commented as they neared her building. "Mrs. Bryant never invites anyone to the penthouse. Not since the old man died anyway." Looking up at her building, now marked for revitalization by the very family who had just offered her financial salvation, Jasmine wondered what complex game she had unwittingly entered, and whether she could play it without losing herself in the process. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between your principles and a life-changing opportunity? Comment number 1. If you think Jasmine should take the job with the Bryant family even though they're responsible for displacing her community. Hit like if you believe there's more to Elizabeth Bryant than meets the eye. And don't forget to subscribe to see how this unexpected connection between worlds continues to unfold. What do you think Elizabeth's true intentions are, and why did she specifically ask for Jasmine to work with her foundation rather than as a personal companion? Could this be a trap, or is it the beginning of something revolutionary? Jasmine accepted the position with the Bryant Foundation, starting the following Monday with mixed emotions churning in her stomach. She gave notice at Lumière, enduring Charles Whitmore's snide remarks about her using connections to advance beyond her station. "I always knew you were looking for a way out of honest work," he said as she turned in her uniform. "Latching onto rich customers is certainly one way to do it." Her final shifts were marked by cold treatment from management and curious glances from co-workers who had witnessed the interaction with the Bryants but didn't dare ask questions directly. When Monday arrived, Jasmine dressed in the most professional outfit. She owned a navy blue pantsuit, purchased secondhand for interviews, and returned to the Bryant building. This time, security recognized her name and directed her to the 48th floor instead of the penthouse. The Bryant Foundation occupied half the floor, with sleek glass offices arranged around a central workspace. Jasmine discovered she had been assigned a beautiful corner office next to Elizabeth's, with views that made her previous workplace look like a storage closet. Alexander was noticeably absent during her orientation, represented instead by Vanessa, who efficiently explained Jasmine's role benefits package and the Foundation's current initiatives. Elizabeth joined them midway through, accompanied by a professional interpreter who Jasmine soon learned was employed primarily for group meetings. When they were alone, Elizabeth dismissed the interpreter and explained through sign language that the foundation had been established after her husband's death, ostensibly to improve the company's public image. Victor never cared about philanthropy. She signed her movements conveying bitterness. He created this foundation to offset negative press about displacement. But I want to transform it into something meaningful that actually addresses the damage his policies caused. Over the next several days, Jasmine learned that Elizabeth's position in the company was far more complex than she had initially assumed. Since losing her hearing, Elizabeth had been systematically excluded from major company decisions, despite technically holding significant ownership. Her late husband had treated her disability as an embarrassment, arranging social events where her inability to hear would be least noticeable and limiting her involvement in business matters. The board members, most of whom had been Victor's associates for decades, continued this pattern, speaking to her through interpreters, rather than directly and often making decisions without her input. Alexander, eager to prove himself as the new CEO, rarely contradicted the board's decisions or advocated for his mother's inclusion. During her first week, Jasmine attended a board meeting where Elizabeth presented ideas for affordable housing initiatives that would allow displaced residents priority access to new Bryant developments. The board members listened politely before dismissing her proposals without serious consideration, citing cost concerns and shareholder expectations. Jasmine noticed how they spoke about Elizabeth as if she weren't present, using phrases like Elizabeth's pet projects and her naive idealism. When Jasmine attempted to defend the economic viability of Elizabeth's proposals based on her business education, she faced thinly veiled racist comments, questioning her qualifications and experience. One board member, Richard Townsend, smiled condescendingly as he asked, "And where exactly did you study urban development economics?" "Certainly not at any institution I'm familiar with." After the meeting, Jasmine found Elizabeth in tears in her office, a sight so unexpected it stopped her in the doorway. This powerful woman, who had seemed so composed, suddenly looked vulnerable and defeated. Elizabeth confided that Bryant Enterprises had been systematically gentrifying historically black neighborhoods for decades, including Jasmine's. The company's practices, buying buildings, neglecting repairs to force out rent-controlled tenants, then renovating for luxury clients, violated ethical standards but remained technically legal through careful exploitation of loopholes and political connections. Elizabeth had been trying to change things from within since her husband's death, but lacked the authority and allies to implement meaningful reforms. That evening, Jasmine received a text from Alexander inviting her to dinner to discuss her future with the company. They met at an exclusive restaurant in Tribeca, where Alexander had reserved a private dining room. He was more relaxed away from the office, ordering expensive wine and speaking about his vision for Bryant Enterprises with unexpected passion. "My father built this company through decisive action," he explained, swirling 18-year-old scotch in a crystal tumbler. He understood that progress requires sacrifice. You can't create the new without clearing away the old. When Jasmine mentioned his mother's proposals, Alexander's expression hardened slightly. "My mother has a good heart, but business requires pragmatism. The board respects her as Victor's widow, but they know sentiment can't drive strategy." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "I appreciate the connection you've formed with my mother. It's been years since I've seen her this engaged, but you should understand the realities of our business." Then came the offer he would ensure that Jasmine's apartment building wasn't touched in the next round of evictions if she helped manage his mother's expectations about changing company policy. "Elizabeth needs to feel heard and valued," he said smoothly. "You can provide that while helping her understand why certain ideas simply aren't feasible." Jasmine felt her chest tighten with indignation. "You want me to manipulate your mother, to make her feel included, while ensuring she doesn't actually influence anything?" Alexander's friendly facade cracked slightly, revealing something calculating beneath. "I'm offering you protection for your grandmother and neighbors. Most people would consider that generous." When Jasmine refused the offer, stating she wouldn't be used to manipulate Elizabeth, Alexander's demeanor changed completely. The charm vanished, replaced by the cold efficiency that had made Bryant Enterprises notorious. "That's unfortunate," he said, signaling for the check. "I thought you were practical. Remember that your position might not be secure if you can't be reasonable about company dynamics." Jasmine left the restaurant shaken, realizing the depths of the Bryant family's dysfunction and the precariousness of her new position. At home, she found an anonymous note slipped under her door. "You're not the first person Elizabeth Bryant has tried to save. Be careful." She spent the night researching Bryant Enterprises' history, discovering patterns of exploitation dating back decades. Several former employees who had worked closely with Elizabeth had left under mysterious circumstances, all after attempting to implement more ethical practices. Each had signed non-disclosure agreements with substantial settlements, their professional lives effectively erased from public record. As sunrise painted her small bedroom with golden light, Jasmine realized she faced an impossible choice: help Elizabeth fight a system designed to silence her or protect herself from becoming another casualty of the Bryant family's internal war. Weeks passed as Jasmine settled into her role at the Bryant Foundation, developing programs that genuinely addressed community needs while navigating the treacherous corporate politics surrounding her position. She formed a genuine friendship with Elizabeth, spending hours in the older woman's office, discussing everything from business strategies to personal histories. Elizabeth shared stories about how her family's attitudes had changed after she lost her hearing at 34. My husband's friends stopped speaking to me directly, she signed one afternoon, as they reviewed grant proposals. At parties, they would ask Victor what Elizabeth would like, while I sat right there reading their lips. After a while, they stopped inviting me altogether. Jasmine nodded, sharing her own experiences of marginalization. When I first started at Lumière, customers would hand their menus back to white servers, assuming I couldn't possibly be assigned to their table. Some would speak deliberately, slowly, as if my race determined my intelligence. Their shared understanding of being underestimated created a bond that transcended their different backgrounds. Elizabeth eventually introduced Jasmine to her personal records, meticulously documented patterns of Bryant Enterprises' predatory practices spanning 3 decades. For years, Elizabeth had secretly compiled evidence of discriminatory housing practices, unethical business dealings, and board decisions that specifically targeted communities of color for revitalization projects. Victor knew I was gathering this information. Elizabeth signed her hands, moving decisively through the air. He thought it was cute, his deaf wife playing detective. He never imagined I might actually use it someday. Her expression hardened with remembered humiliation. He underestimated me because of my disability, just like his board still does. Meanwhile, Alexander's behavior toward Jasmine became increasingly unpredictable. Some days he treated her with unexpected respect, seeking her input on community engagement projects and praising her work publicly. Other days he would undermine her authority during meetings, or question her loyalty to the company in private conversations that felt more like interrogations than discussions. Jasmine learned from Elizabeth that Alexander was under immense pressure from the board to continue his father's aggressive development strategies despite his personal reservations. The company had leveraged significant capital on upcoming projects, and any deviation from the established business model threatened not just profits, but Bryant Enterprises' very survival as currently structured. The contradiction between public philanthropy and private exploitation became painfully clear during a charity gala hosted by the foundation at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Elizabeth insisted Jasmine stay by her side throughout the evening, introducing her as the brilliant mind behind our new community initiatives rather than as her interpreter or assistant. Jasmine recognized several Lumière regulars among the guests' wealthy patrons who now pretended not to know her or seemed confused by her presence on the other side of the serving relationship. She overheard snippets of conversations as she navigated the crowded gallery spaces. Elizabeth's new project, one board member called her when they thought neither woman was paying attention. Another rehabilitation case whispered a woman in diamonds worth more than Jasmine's entire college education. During the gala, Jasmine was approached by Cameron Parker, a journalist known for investigative reporting on urban development issues. He recognized her name from community organizing efforts in Harlem volunteer work Jasmine had done before her schedule became consumed by multiple jobs. Jasmine Harper, working for Bryant Enterprises, he said, studying her with intense curiosity. That's a plot twist I didn't see coming. When he realized she worked specifically for the foundation under Elizabeth's direction, his expression shifted from suspicion to interest. Be careful, he warned, lowering his voice. Bryant has a history of hiring community representatives as window dressing. 3 have left under unusual circumstances in the past 4 years alone. Before they could speak further, Alexander materialized beside them, placing a possessive hand on the small of Jasmine's back. Parker, he acknowledged coldly. Still, chasing conspiracy theories instead of real news. The tension between the men was palpable, as Alexander steered Jasmine away, his fingers pressing into her back with unnecessary force. Later that evening he confronted her in a quiet alcove away from the other guests. Parker has been trying to smear the Bryant name for years, he said, his voice tight with controlled anger. His so-called journalism is nothing but sensationalism targeting successful businesses. When Jasmine defended her right to speak with whomever she chose, Alexander revealed he knew about her research into the company's practices and her private conversations with Elizabeth. "My mother is a brilliant woman, but her judgment can be clouded by emotion," he said, his tone softening to something almost sincere. "She doesn't always understand the complex realities of maintaining a successful enterprise in this economic climate." The conversation escalated into an argument about corporate responsibility and racial discrimination that drew Elizabeth's attention from across the room. She approached quickly, eyes narrowed as she assessed the tension between them. Alexander's expression changed instantly, a pleasant mask sliding into place. But Elizabeth wasn't fooled. She signed furiously at her son, her movements so sharp they seemed to physically push him back. Alexander's facade cracked as he signed back with equal intensity, their silent argument drawing curious glances from nearby guests. He finally stormed off, leaving Elizabeth to explain that her son struggled between wanting to reform the company and fearing failure if he deviated from his father's successful but ruthless methods. He was different before Victor died. She signed her movements softening with sadness, more idealistic. The board has been molding him into his father's image, and he's letting them because he's afraid of disappointing them. That night, Jasmine received a panicked call from her grandmother. They'd received a new eviction notice with an accelerated timeline, giving them just 14 days instead of the standard 30, despite Alexander's promise to protect their building. The notice cited urgent structural renovations that couldn't be delayed. When Jasmine confronted Alexander the next morning, he claimed complete ignorance, promising to investigate immediately. His smooth response and perfect concern seemed rehearsed, leaving her uncertain whether to believe him. Returning to her office, Jasmine found a manila envelope on her desk, containing something that hadn't been there when she left for lunch. Inside was a confidential file with evidence that Alexander had personally approved the accelerated evictions in her neighborhood just 2 days after their dinner, specifically flagging her building for priority redevelopment. An anonymous source had highlighted a pattern of retaliatory actions against anyone who challenged company practices, including targeted evictions, employment termination, and even orchestrated personal scandals to discredit vocal critics. The final page contained a handwritten note: "Elizabeth isn't the first Bryant to try changing things. Others have failed. Watch your back." Jasmine carefully photocopied the confidential documents before returning them to their envelope, her hands shaking with a combination of fear and rage. She debated whether to confront Alexander directly, but decided against it, realizing that revealing her knowledge might endanger both her position and her grandmother's housing situation further. Instead, she requested a private meeting with Elizabeth, bringing the evidence with her. Elizabeth was devastated by her son's duplicity, her elegant hands trembling as she examined the documents. "I believed him when he said he wanted to change things." She signed, tears welling in her eyes. "I thought he was just struggling with the board's influence, not actively undermining our work." Together they devised a plan to bring the issues to the full board, with irrefutable documentation of Bryant Enterprises' discriminatory practices. Elizabeth believed that several newer board members, particularly those who had joined after Victor's death, might support reforms if presented with clear evidence of potential legal liability. The company faces significant risk from class action lawsuits if these patterns become public, Elizabeth signed. Self-interest might accomplish what moral arguments cannot. As they prepared their presentation over the next several days, Jasmine noticed subtle changes in the office environment. The security guards who had previously ignored her now watched her movements closely. Her access to certain database files became mysteriously restricted, and she strongly suspected her computer was being monitored. When she mentioned these concerns to Elizabeth, the older woman nodded grimly. Victor used similar patterns of surveillance before forcing out executives who disagreed with him, she signed. The company has always had an extensive security division that goes beyond normal corporate protocols. A late-night call from Cameron Parker confirmed Jasmine's suspicions. The journalist had been investigating Bryant Enterprises for years and had documented a pattern of systematic retaliation against internal reformers. 3 previous employees who attempted to change company practices were discredited through fabricated scandals before being fired, he explained. One was framed for embezzlement, another for sexual harassment, and a third for leaking confidential information to competitors. All three eventually signed NDAs with substantial settlements. He offered to publish Jasmine's story if she was willing to go on record providing additional protection through public exposure. Once your story is public, they'll have to be more careful about how they handle you, he argued. Retaliation would only confirm everything you've revealed. The next morning, Jasmine arrived at work to find Elizabeth absent, and her own office locked her keycard deactivated. Alexander's assistant, Vanessa, approached with visible discomfort, explaining that Jasmine had been temporarily suspended pending an investigation into unauthorized access of confidential company information. Security guards appeared to escort her from the building while employees watched in uncomfortable silence, the public humiliation clearly designed to discredit her among her colleagues. At home, she found her apartment door slightly ajar, sending a chill down her spine. Inside the place had been thoroughly searched, with drawers left open and contents disturbed. Her computer was missing, along with all her research notes and the copies of the Bryant documents. Her grandmother sat trembling on the sofa, shaken but physically unharmed. Men came saying they were from building maintenance, Eliza explained. They insisted they needed emergency access to check for water damage. When I questioned them, they became intimidating. They went straight for your room. Before Jasmine could process this violation, her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number coffee shop on 118th. 20 minutes. Come alone. Against her better judgment, but seeing few alternatives, Jasmine told her grandmother to stay with a neighbor and made her way to the location. She spotted Elizabeth immediately sitting in a back corner with her private driver standing protectively nearby. Elizabeth looked pale and tired, her usual perfect posture now slightly hunched. She explained through rapid signing that she'd been effectively placed under house arrest by Alexander, who had convinced the board her mental health episodes were compromising company security. She had managed to slip away only by feigning illness and convincing her regular nurse to cover for her brief absence. Alexander has been planning this for months, she signed, her fingers moving with bitter precision. He was never going to allow real change in the company. He just wanted to identify and neutralize threats to his authority, including me. Elizabeth revealed that her late husband's will had left controlling interest in the company, divided between her and Alexander, with her shares held in a trust that Alexander now controlled as her health guardian. She had never challenged this arrangement because she believed Alexander would eventually reform the company from within. Now she realized he had become exactly like his father, perhaps worse because he cloaked his ruthlessness in performative concern. Tomorrow's emergency board meeting isn't about your supposed security breach. Elizabeth signed, her eyes darting nervously to the cafe entrance with each new customer. Alexander is planning to announce a massive redevelopment project that will displace thousands from historically black neighborhoods across 5 boroughs. Your grandmother's building is just the beginning. Elizabeth handed Jasmine a key to a safety deposit box containing backup copies of all their evidence, plus additional documentation spanning decades that Elizabeth had compiled in secret. I've spent years preparing for this moment, she signed. I just never thought I'd be fighting my own son. As they talked, Elizabeth's driver spotted Alexander's security team entering the coffee shop. They barely escaped through the kitchen, separating to avoid being followed. Jasmine took the safety deposit box key and promised to find a way to expose the truth before tomorrow's board meeting made the displacement plans official. That night, while hiding at a friend's apartment in Brooklyn, Jasmine received another anonymous message, this time containing video footage from what appeared to be a preliminary board meeting earlier that day. The footage showed Alexander telling the board that Jasmine had manipulated his mother's trust to advance a personal vendetta, using her theatrical signing ability to win Elizabeth's confidence while accessing confidential documents for unspecified nefarious purposes. The video showed board members nodding sympathetically as Alexander portrayed Jasmine as an opportunistic con artist exploiting a disabled woman. Unfortunately, Mother's condition makes her particularly vulnerable to this kind of manipulation, he said, with practiced concern. Our priority must be protecting her and the company from those who would take advantage of her generous nature. Watching his performance, Jasmine finally understood the ruthlessness that had built Bryant Enterprises, a willingness to destroy anyone who threatened the status quo, even family. With less than 24 hours before the board would vote to approve the redevelopment plan, she had to find a way to expose both Alexander's lies and the company's discriminatory practices before thousands of families lost their homes. Do you believe Alexander truly started with good intentions before corporate pressure changed him, or was he playing a long game all along? Comment number 1, if you think people can be corrupted by power, or comment number 2, if you believe Alexander was always his father's son at heart. Hit the like button if you're rooting for Jasmine and Elizabeth to expose the truth before it's too late. Don't forget to subscribe to see how they'll fight back against seemingly impossible odds. What would you do if you discovered damning evidence against a powerful company, but knew they could destroy your life if you came forward? Would you risk everything for the truth, or protect yourself and your family first? Desperate but determined, Jasmine retrieved Elizabeth's documents from the safety deposit box early the next morning, carefully examining decades of evidence documenting Bryant Enterprises' systematic discrimination. The detailed records showed a clear pattern of targeting predominantly black and brown neighborhoods for revitalization projects that invariably displaced original residents. Properties were acquired through questionable means, often using front companies to hide Bryant's involvement until contracts were finalized. Elizabeth had meticulously documented everything from board meeting minutes to private conversations with her husband that revealed explicit racial bias in development decisions. With the evidence secured, Jasmine contacted Cameron Parker, sharing select documents to establish credibility while protecting Elizabeth as the source. The journalist was initially skeptical, having been burned by false leads before, but became convinced after reviewing the evidence. "This is the smoking gun we've needed for years," he said, his voice tense with excitement. But publishing won't be simple. Bryant Enterprises has substantial influence over most major media outlets in the city. They've killed stories before through advertising pressure and legal threats. While Parker began working his journalistic connections, Jasmine received unexpected support from former colleagues at Lumière. Word of her firing had spread through service industry networks, and several co-workers reached out with their own stories of witnessing the Bryant's treatment of service workers, particularly people of color. Marcus, a bartender who had worked at Lumière for 8 years, revealed he had overheard Alexander discussing plans to handle the Jasmine situation with board members after the signing incident with Elizabeth. "He was furious that you'd connected with his mother," Marcus explained. "He told them you needed to be managed carefully because his mother had become attached to you. They laughed about how easily you could be discredited if necessary." With Parker's help, Jasmine connected with a tenants' rights coalition that had been fighting Bryant developments across multiple boroughs. She discovered her situation was part of a larger pattern. Multiple community advocates who had challenged Bryant projects had faced similar intimidation tactics, from targeted evictions to manufactured scandals. The coalition had been gathering testimonies for years, but lacked insider evidence to substantiate their claims against such a powerful corporation. The coalition leader, Amara Washington, had lost her own home to a Bryant development 4 years earlier and had built a network of affected residents across the city. "We've been waiting for someone like you," she told Jasmine during their first meeting in a crowded community center in the Bronx. Someone with both insider access and personal stake in the outcome. Someone they couldn't easily dismiss. Together, they began coordinating a multi-pronged response to the board meeting scheduled for the next morning. While Jasmine accessed legal resources through the coalition, she learned her grandmother had received a formal 48-hour eviction notice, invalidating the previous 14-day timeline. When she attempted to visit Eliza, she found the entire block cordoned off for an emergency structural assessment conducted by Bryant contracted engineers. Residents were being offered below-market buyouts to leave immediately, with those refusing facing legal threats about liability for remaining in an unsafe structure. Through an encrypted messaging app suggested by Parker, Elizabeth informed Jasmine that she remained under surveillance, but had contacted her personal attorney to challenge Alexander's control of her trust based on fraud and misrepresentation. The process would take time they didn't have with the vote on the redevelopment project scheduled for 9 the next morning. She suggested Jasmine focus all efforts on stopping the board vote, which once passed would be difficult to reverse, even with legal challenges. The coalition developed a comprehensive plan leveraging their diverse skills and connections. While Parker prepared to release key documents to select independent journalists, coalition members organized community protests to surround Bryant Enterprises headquarters during the board meeting. Several former Bryant employees affected by previous retaliation agreed to speak publicly despite their NDAs, calculating that strength in numbers would make individual legal action against them all impractical. Meanwhile, Jasmine discovered an unexpected ally within Bryant Enterprises, Alexander's executive assistant, Vanessa, who reached out through a secure channel provided by Elizabeth. Vanessa had worked for the company for 12 years and had witnessed Alexander's transformation from an idealistic heir with reformist ideas to a replica of his ruthless father. "He wasn't always like this," Vanessa explained during a clandestine meeting in a public park far from Bryant offices. When he first joined the company after business school, he genuinely wanted to change things. He presented alternative development models that would preserve affordable housing while still generating profits. According to Vanessa, the board had systematically broken Alexander down, rejecting every progressive proposal and threatening to have him removed as CEO if he didn't maintain his father's profit margins. Over time, he had adapted to survive, eventually internalizing the cutthroat values he initially opposed. The final transformation happened after his father died, Vanessa said. It was like he felt he had to become victor to prove himself worthy of the company. Vanessa provided crucial operational information. Board meetings included ASL interpreters for Elizabeth's benefit, but the interpreters were instructed to modify certain information when translating for her, particularly regarding displacement statistics and community impact reports. This explained why Elizabeth remained unaware of many board decisions supposedly made with her approval. "The interpreters are contracted through a Bryant subsidiary," Vanessa explained. "They're told the modifications are simplifications for efficiency. Most don't realize they're participating in actively deceiving a board member." As their plans solidified, Jasmine received a direct call from Alexander, offering a final chance to be reasonable. He offered a substantial settlement of $500,000 and guaranteed housing for her grandmother in one of Bryant's luxury properties if she signed an NDA and publicly attributed her allegations to a misunderstanding arising from her limited corporate experience. When she refused, his tone changed from persuasive to threatening. "You should consider what happened to others who chose to fight Bryant Enterprises," he said, his voice devoid of emotion. "This isn't just about business anymore. This is personal, and I protect what's mine." The night before the board meeting, Jasmine stayed with a coalition member after discovering her friend's apartment had been broken into. Though she had already relocated Elizabeth's documents to a secure location, the message was clear: Alexander knew how to find her and wasn't above using intimidation. With few options left and time running out, the coalition moved up their timeline, planning to release the evidence and mobilize protesters before dawn to ensure maximum visibility when board members arrived for their 9 o'clock meeting. As Jasmine finalized details with Parker and coalition leaders, she received one last message from Elizabeth. "Whatever happens tomorrow, remember this wasn't just your fight, it was always mine too." Sometimes the most powerful act is refusing to remain silent when the world expects you to have nothing to say. With those words strengthening her resolve, Jasmine prepared to confront the corporate giant that had underestimated both women's determination to be heard. At precisely 5 o'clock the next morning, major news outlets simultaneously received comprehensive documentation of Bryant Enterprises' discriminatory practices delivered through secure channels established by Parker's journalistic network. By 7, as early commuters filled Manhattan streets, hundreds of protesters began surrounding Bryant Tower, their ranks, including not just coalition members but scores of residents facing eviction from Bryant-owned properties across all 5 boroughs. News vans lined the adjacent streets, reporters broadcasting live as former employees shared their experiences of intimidation and retaliation after challenging company policies. Social media exploded with the hashtag number Bryant Evicts, accompanied by Elizabeth's meticulously documented evidence, now converted to easily shareable infographics showing decades of targeted displacement in communities of documented color. Inside, Bryant Tower Jasmine navigated through service entrances using an employee access card provided by Vanessa. Security had been heightened throughout the building, but the protest outside had created sufficient confusion and distraction for her to move through the building relatively unnoticed. Dressed in a Bryant Enterprises blazer borrowed from a sympathetic employee, she blended with the dozens of staff members rushing to manage the unfolding crisis, her hair pulled back severely and ID badge prominently displayed. Through service corridors and freight elevators, she reached the executive floor where board meetings were held, her heart racing but her mind focused on the task ahead. Her destination wasn't the boardroom itself, where security would certainly stop her, but the smaller preparation room where interpreters reviewed materials before meetings. The lead interpreter, a professional ASL translator named Rebecca, who had worked with Elizabeth for years, recognized Jasmine immediately. "You're the one they're looking for," she said, eyes widening with recognition. "There are security alerts throughout the building with your picture." Instead of calling for security, however, Rebecca hesitated, giving Jasmine the opportunity to explain the systematic mistranslation of board proceedings for Elizabeth's benefit. "They've been instructing you to modify information about displacement numbers and community impacts, haven't they?" Jasmine asked, watching understanding dawn on the interpreter's face. "They call it simplifications for efficiency, but it's really about keeping Elizabeth from knowing the full impact of board decisions." Rebecca, an ethical professional who wasn't aware of the extent of the deception, appeared genuinely horrified. "I knew something felt wrong about those instructions," she admitted, "but I never imagined it was part of a systematic effort to mislead a board member." After a brief but intense conversation, Rebecca agreed to accurately translate everything during today's session, including the backroom discussions usually omitted from Elizabeth's version of events. She positioned Jasmine in an audio-visual control room, adjacent to the boardroom where technicians monitored meeting recordings, but which would be empty during the actual session due to confidentiality protocols. From there, Jasmine could observe everything through one-way glass, without being seen. As 9 o'clock approached, board members filtered into the elegant conference room, their conversations tense as they discussed the protesters outside and the morning's damaging media coverage. Alexander arrived last, his customary confidence intact, despite the crisis unfolding around him. He appeared impeccably groomed and utterly composed, a man accustomed to weathering storms with his privilege as armor. Elizabeth sat silently in her usual place at the massive oak table, apparently subdued, her posture less commanding than usual. The board chair, Richard Townsend, called the meeting to order with a dismissive wave toward the windows where protesters could be seen 20 floors below. "Before we address the agenda, I feel we must acknowledge the unfortunate publicity stunt being orchestrated by a disgruntled former employee." He began, his tone suggesting the entire situation was beneath their collective concern. "Our PR team assures me this will be contained by afternoon." Alexander presented the redevelopment project as planned, characterizing it as urban renewal rather than displacement, his presentation slides showing gleaming new buildings without mentioning the communities they would destroy. He emphasized the project's profitability and minimal legal exposure due to carefully structured contracts and political relationships. When several newer board members raised concerns about the protests and media coverage, Alexander smoothly assured them the company's extensive media connections would reframe the narrative within hours. "By this evening, this will be portrayed as radical activists opposing urban improvement," he stated confidently. "We've managed similar situations before." Throughout the presentation, no one addressed Elizabeth directly. Though she watched every word being signed accurately for the first time, her expression gradually shifting from resignation to cold fury. As Alexander concluded and called for the vote, Elizabeth unexpectedly raised her hand. The room fell silent as she began signing, her movements precise and commanding. Rebecca, the interpreter, translated exactly as promised. For 30 years I've sat in this room while you spoke about me rather than to me. Today, you'll hear me." The board members exchanged uncomfortable glances as Elizabeth continued signing with growing intensity. "While you were planning today's vote, I was providing evidence to the Attorney General's office documenting decades of discriminatory practices authorized in this very room. Bryant Enterprises isn't just facing public relations problems, we're facing potential criminal charges for housing discrimination fraud and corporate espionage against community organizations." Alexander attempted to interrupt, suggesting his mother was confused or misinformed, but Elizabeth continued signing forcefully, her movements cutting through his objections like a blade. She formally invoked a rarely used clause in the company charter, allowing a trust beneficiary to reclaim voting control under circumstances of corporate malfeasance. Her personal attorney, present via video conference, that Vanessa had quietly arranged, confirmed the legal filings had been submitted that morning. The documents prove systematic discrimination in housing practices, targeted retaliation against employees who raised ethical concerns, and deliberate misinformation provided to me as a board member. Elizabeth signed her expression, resolute. These actions constitute breach of fiduciary duty and fraud. The boardroom erupted into chaos. Directors talked over one another, some demanding explanations from Alexander, others calling for immediate legal consultation. During the confusion, Alexander spotted Jasmine, observing from the adjacent room through the one-way glass that a frantic technician had inadvertently illuminated while checking communication systems. Alexander's carefully maintained composure shattered completely. His face contorted with rage as he realized the extent of their coordination. His mother, his assistant, and the waitress he had underestimated had outmaneuvered him completely. He lunged toward the connecting door, but was restrained by security responding to Elizabeth's decisive gesture. Elizabeth continued signing, now addressing the board directly, rather than through Alexander, as had been customary. She announced that effective immediately she was voting her controlling shares to replace the current board with new directors committed to ethical development practices. The current redevelopment plans were suspended pending complete community review, and as proof of commitment to change, all active eviction proceedings were immediately halted. Alexander, seeing his position crumbling before his eyes, made a final desperate play. He produced documents from his briefcase, claiming Elizabeth had recently been medically evaluated and found mentally incompetent, invalidating her attempts to reclaim control. "This is painful for all of us," he said, his voice conveying practiced concern as he distributed the reports. "But my mother's condition has been deteriorating for months. These assessments from 3 independent specialists confirm she's no longer capable of making sound business decisions." The board chair reviewed the documents with visible relief, apparently seeing a path to resolving the crisis while maintaining the status quo. But before he could speak, Vanessa stepped forward from her position against the wall where executive assistants typically stood during meetings. With her voice shaking but determined, she admitted she had forged those medical evaluations under Alexander's explicit direction, a felony she had already confessed to authorities that morning. From her phone, she played recordings of Alexander directing her to falsify records to maintain control over his mother's shares and systematically hide information from Elizabeth. "I've worked for this company for 12 years, Vanessa said, her professional composure finally breaking. "I've witnessed the transformation of our business practices from aggressive to predatory, from development to exploitation. I can no longer participate in the destruction of communities for profit." Security personnel entered the boardroom, this time responding to the board chair's confused gestures. But instead of removing Elizabeth or Jasmine, as Alexander clearly expected, they positioned themselves on either side of Alexander himself. Elizabeth's attorney explained via video link that given the evidence of fraud, the temporary board she was appointing had authorized Alexander's immediate removal from company premises pending investigation. As security escorted Alexander from the building where his family name adorned the facade in gleaming letters, he locked eyes with Jasmine and Elizabeth standing together near the boardroom windows. His expression shifted from rage to something more complex, a mixture of defeat and perhaps reluctant respect. The women's silent connection, initially about nothing more than shared language, had ultimately brought down an empire built on silencing others. Outside, the protesters erupted in cheers as news spread that eviction proceedings had been halted. Elizabeth, standing before the board that had marginalized her for decades, signed one final message that Rebecca translated with evident satisfaction. Generations of Bryant men believed power came from making others invisible. Today we've proven that true power comes from ensuring everyone is finally seen. 6 months later, Jasmine stood behind a podium at the grand opening of Bryant Community Housing Initiative's first completed project. The spring sunshine illuminated the modern building constructed in the same Harlem neighborhood where she and her grandmother had once faced eviction. As the newly appointed Director of Community Development for the restructured Bryant Foundation, she had helped implement Elizabeth's vision for ethical urban development, creating affordable housing that allowed displaced residents to return, while incorporating community spaces designed with neighborhood input. The crowd gathered for the ribbon-cutting ceremony reflected a diversity rarely seen at Bryant corporate events. Before longtime residents, community advocates, corporate partners, and city officials, all witnessing the physical manifestation of the company's transformation. The Bryant Corporation had undergone a complete overhaul under Elizabeth's leadership. She now actively chaired the board with meetings conducted simultaneously in spoken English and ASL as a standard practice. Their new corporate charter explicitly acknowledged and addressed historical discrimination with substantial resources dedicated to repairing communities previously harmed by their development practices. Mandatory staff training now included courses on housing equity and the historical context of urban development in communities of color. Alexander, facing multiple investigations for fraud, document falsification, and corporate espionage, had accepted a plea deal requiring him to divest completely from the company and perform 2,000 hours of community service in Decatur, neighborhoods his policies had once threatened. Though initially bitter and resistant, recent reports from community organizations suggested he was showing unexpected signs of genuine change through his mandatory work with housing advocates, perhaps finding the purpose that had eluded him. As his father's successor, the Lumière restaurant, where Jasmine had once served invisibly, now hosted a training program for deaf culinary students funded by the Bryant Foundation as part of their community education initiatives. Charles Whitmore had been replaced after an internal investigation revealed systematic discrimination against staff of color, with Marcus the bartender, who had supported Jasmine, now serving as general manager, implementing equity-focused hiring practices. As Jasmine concluded her speech about the housing initiative's future plans, Elizabeth joined her at the podium, elegant, as always, in a deep purple suit that complemented her silver-streaked hair. Together, they signed the ribbon-cutting dedication, Elizabeth's hands moving in perfect synchronization with Jasmine's. The crowd, many having learned basic sign language through community programs established by the foundation, applauded as Elizabeth embraced Jasmine, the mutual respect between them evident to all observers. Later, at a private celebration in the building's community garden, Jasmine's grandmother reminisced about teaching her sign language as a child. "I always told you that communication builds bridges," Eliza said, watching neighborhood children explore the garden beds she had helped design. "But I never imagined your bridges would reconnect entire communities." Elizabeth, sitting nearby with her interpreter present, but mostly unused among friends who now signed competently, shared that losing her hearing had ultimately given her a different kind of voice. "When the world stopped listening to me, I learned to communicate in ways that couldn't be ignored." She signed her movements graceful after years of practice. Sometimes, silence becomes its own form of power when you refuse to accept invisibility. Cameron Parker, now heading a nonprofit journalism initiative funded by the Bryant Foundation, documented the company's transformation as a case study in corporate accountability. His latest article noted that applications for the Foundation's Sign Language Scholarship Program had increased tenfold since Jasmine's story became public, with particular interest from students planning careers in community development and advocacy. The evening ended with Jasmine and Elizabeth sitting quietly on the rooftop garden of the new development, watching the sunset paint Manhattan's skyline in shades of gold and pink. Elizabeth signed something that made Jasmine laugh, a private joke between friends whose unexpected connection had changed not just their own lives, but an entire system built on making people like them invisible. As new residents moved into their apartments below, some returning to neighborhoods they'd been forced from years earlier, Jasmine reflected on how a single moment of recognition, her hands forming words for a woman no one else bothered to truly see, had ultimately given voice to an entire community silenced by corporate greed and social indifference. Sometimes, she thought, watching Elizabeth's hands shape stories against the darkening sky, the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to be invisible. What moment in your life changed everything because someone truly saw you for who you are? Has there been a time when you used your unique skills or knowledge to make a difference, even in a small way? Comment below with your story. If this tale of courage and transformation inspired you, please hit that like button and subscribe to see more stories about everyday heroes fighting systemic injustice. Share this video with someone who needs a reminder that their voice matters even when others try to silence them. Thank you for joining me on this journey from invisibility to empowerment. Remember, sometimes the smallest connections can create the biggest changes. This story reminds us that true power lies not in wealth or status, but in genuine human connection and the courage to stand against injustice. Jasmine's ability to communicate in sign language, a skill many considered unimportant, became the catalyst for transformative change. When we recognize and value people others overlook, we challenge the systems designed to keep certain voices silent. Elizabeth's experience shows how disability can become a unique strength. Her deafness, which others saw as a limitation, gave her perspective to recognize discrimination others normalized. By documenting injustice, rather than accepting it, she created the foundation for meaningful change. The story also highlights how corporations often perpetuate racial discrimination through revitalization that displaces communities of color. These systems persist because those harmed remain invisible to decision-makers, their stories untold, and their humanity unacknowledged. Perhaps most importantly, silent recognition teaches us that meaningful change requires both insiders and outsiders working together. Elizabeth needed Jasmine's perspective and courage. Jasmine needed Elizabeth's resources and position. Together they transformed an exploitative system by refusing to remain invisible. Real change happens when we truly see each other across differences of race, ability, and class, and when we use our unique positions and talents to ensure everyone else is seen too. What moments in your own life have you felt truly seen or painfully invisible? Have you ever witnessed discrimination disguised as progress in your community? Share your experiences in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe for more narratives that expose systemic injustice and celebrate the power of unexpected connections. Remember, sometimes the smallest actions, like Jasmine using sign language, can spark revolutionary change. Share this video with someone who's fighting to be heard when others want them to remain silent. Thank you for joining this conversation about how we can transform our communities by ensuring everyone is truly seen and valued. Together, we can build a world where no one's humanity is invisible.